3 minutes after 10 is the time. There are some mornings, aren't there, where you feel that everything is too complicated to take a clear bead on it. But I think sometimes if you can cut through the weeds, if you can cut through the complications, you can get to questions that are of considerable clarity. And it remains a fairly big if, the interventions with Nick and others this morning of the Shadow Health Minister notwithstanding, if Rishi Sunak failed to consult the leader of the opposition before ordering fresh airstrikes, new airstrikes against Houthi targets in Yemen, I think we've got a fairly big problem. Rishi Sunak, I would remind you, was voted for by precisely nobody. The only people that have voted for Rishi Sunak are the people that voted for him to become the MP for Richmond in Yorkshire. And that has, some relevance, surely, on democratic mandates more broadly speaking, but possibly a bit of a distraction to go in on that. Crucially, this is a decision taken by a nation, not a government, effectively. If you're not going to put it before Parliament, then the only rationale for that is that you know that you've got the support of the opposition. So there's no point putting it before Parliament, or at least there is no need to put it before Parliament, because the result of any vote is a foregone conclusion. It does away with debate. And although some contributors to debates like that can be a bit self-indulgent, it also offers an opportunity for the public, for the body politic, to learn a bit more about what some of the issues are and what some of the consequences may be. I don't understand, and I'm going to ask you this question and others, I don't understand why the UK is involved at all. I mean, why is it the UK standing or flying alongside the US? But more importantly, the decision by Rishi Sunak to do this, to conduct airstrikes in the Middle East, without any, so far as we can tell, without any consultation of the leader of the opposition, seems to me to be stunning. So they're off. The attacks are underway. It's shipping in the Red Sea that they're worried about. Houthi attacks on shipping in the Red Sea, which they say is designed to both disrupt and retaliate against support for Israel in that area. So the Houthi rebels, who are a pretty bloodthirsty bunch, but I'm afraid that's a word that can be applied with a degree of indiscriminate accuracy in the context of conflict. They're a pretty bloodthirsty bunch, and they say that they are doing this, and that UK and US, and this perhaps is an answer to my first question, UK and US vessels are coming under particular attack because of their very public, vocal and prominent support for the continuing actions of Israel in Gaza, where the death toll has now soared past 25,000, although we must also add that 21 Israeli troops have also died in Gaza in the last few hours while rigging up explosives in a building where obviously the explosives were designed to blow up other people, not them, but they have lost their lives as well. The two countries, the US and the UK, have said that they are trying to protect the free flow of commerce. A joint statement that came from the Pentagon said that an additional round of proportionate and necessary strikes against the Houthis has been undertaken. It's the 8th strike, but it's the second time the UK have joined in. The first time, of course, was the 11th of January. The newish Foreign Secretary, David Cameron, and you don't have to, but he was made a lord, of course, despite many question marks still hanging over his involvement in the Greensill company, which has now gone under, and various and of course his personal responsibility for an awful lot of the problems that the country is facing as a consequence both of his cowardice in the face of the threat of Faragists and his loose support for the disgusting ideological horrors of austerity. But he's Foreign Secretary now, because in this country you get rewarded for failure if you're far enough to the right wing or you know the right people. He describes it as a clear message that will continue to degrade the Houthis' ability to carry out attacks. I have a horrible feeling that Rishi Sunak is doing this because there's an election this year and he thinks that voters quite like the look of someone who gets stuck in to Middle Eastern conflicts, even against the backdrop of relatively disastrous involvement in the Second Gulf War and elsewhere, failure to get properly involved perhaps in Syria. I don't know why he's doing it, and I'm about to ask you. But I do know that if the Shadow Health Minister, talking to Nick earlier, was correct, and oddly, we find ourselves in a position where the Conservatives say that Labour was informed, but not in a position where Labour agree, or the most senior Labour politician to speak so far doesn't agree. I think, and listen, you know as well as I do by now that my radar on these issues is far from infallible. My antennae sometimes twitch at the wrong times, and sometimes they don't twitch at all at the right times. And I don't like using phrases like big deal in the context of conversations like this because they sound a little childish. But I think this is a very big deal. I don't think that the United Kingdom should be getting involved in airstrikes anywhere on an autonomous decision taken by a Prime Minister. So, and I also found, while we're on the subject, I found the argument from David Cameron last time on January the 11th that this has nothing to do with the wider conflict in Israel and Gaza almost unbelievably disingenuous, given that the people that they were bombing insisted that the actions they'd taken that they were now being bombed for were done in support of the Palestinian people and in retaliation to the American and UK support for Israel. And that is a very lonely place internationally now, that support for Israel. Ehud Barak, a former Prime Minister of Israel, Israel's most decorated soldier. I mention that because even the biggest qualifier this morning for Idiot's Corner is going to struggle to describe Ehud Barak as anti-Semitic. He's warned that Israel will find itself sinking in the Gaza mud for years to come if Benjamin Netanyahu retains his fragile grip on power. So the criticism of Israel, the criticism of Netanyahu comes from all corners now, including yesterday families of hostages who stormed the Knesset. And yet the claim from David Cameron that the decision to bomb Houthi rebels has nothing to do with the situation in Israel and Gaza is extraordinary. All right, I've now got a little further information for you, a little breaking news. A Labour source has just told LBC that they expected to be briefed and that Sir Keir Starmer was not informed ahead of time. So clarification for you, breaking news for you. At the time of the 10 o'clock news bulletin, the Conservatives were saying that Labour had been informed. We were relying, and there was no reason to doubt her word, because she was doing the rounds this morning, as they say, which means she would have been fully briefed and informed by the Shadow Health Minister that Labour had not been informed. But we're now fairly confident that Sir Keir Starmer was not informed ahead of time that Rishi Sunak had independently and autonomously decided to drop bombs in the Middle East. Because that's always worked out really well in the recent past. 0345 6060 973 is the number you can call as a citizen of this country to tell me what you think about this action, because the Prime Minister doesn't care. Not only does he not care about what you think about this, he doesn't care what the Leader of the Opposition thinks about this. He doesn't care about the most basic requirements of parliamentary democracy, particularly in the context of killing foreigners. You don't do it under convention and tradition without support. And if you're not sure that you would get parliamentary support, you have a vote. If you are sure that you'll get parliamentary support, you can be in that position only and exclusively because the Leader of the Opposition has assured you of his or her support. So I do increasingly think that we're in very strange waters here. And I do understand some of it, and I don't understand other bits of it, which is where you come in. 12 minutes after 10 is the time. Question number one. Do you buy for a nanosecond the Conservative government's insistence that this has nothing to do with the situation in Israel and Gaza and is instead entirely about keeping trade routes open? I mean, just think for a moment about timing. 0345 6060 973. Question number two. And sometimes when we're dealing with hefty issues of constitutional import, it's a little bit hard for me to convey to you the sense of urgency that I feel, because it feels as if we're sort of icebergs floating slowly in the sea. It's all a bit big. It's a bit above my pay grade, James. It's all a bit important, this. I certainly don't on this programme invite in sort of lazy, knee-jerk, ill-informed responses to issues of note, but equally I quite like the subjects about which it's not too hard to arrive at a strong opinion. But this one, and PMQ's of course coming up tomorrow, this one seems to me to be quite significant. What is Rishi Sunak playing at when he sides with America in bombing Houthi positions in the Middle East, which may or may not be the right thing to do. It's impossible to say with certainty at this point in proceedings. But what is he playing at? If, as we believe, he hasn't even briefed, let alone consulted, the leader of the opposition, Sir Keir Starmer. If you hit the numbers now, you will get through. And the numbers you need, as always on this programme, are 0345 6060 973. So this is the bit that perhaps is most interesting. I mean, I am doing a bit of a Marvin Gaye this morning. I am interested in what you think is going on, because you have Houthis who are backed by Iran, who've been targeting ships that they say are linked to Israel and the West, which means that although they've been active in that area for years, the ships that they're targeting latterly are ships that they say are linked to Israel and the West. So we are now retaliating because that includes our ships. Prior to now, our ships were not particularly in the firing line, probably because they're better armed than you pick off the weakest one at the back of the pack, don't you, if it's piracy. But if it's political or military, then you focus on the strongest. You have to. So they're going after British and American ships, particularly American ships, in the Red Sea. They say they're doing it because of links to Israel. And, the death toll, as I say, has passed 25,000 now, although you'll struggle to find that figure in any British newspapers today. Incredibly. That's a conversation we can have on another occasion. They've taken out an arms silo and other sites, but they haven't asked the leader of the opposition or informed the leader of the opposition in advance. So I want you to tell me, number one, whether you... And I want some people to believe it. I want you to explain to me why you think it's fair to claim, for the British government to claim that this has got nothing to do with the things that the people they're bombing say it's all about. That just seems to me, at 10:15 on a Tuesday morning, to be at best disingenuous and at worst downright deceitful. But I could be wrong, right? 0345 6060 973. And then number two, can you do a better job than me of expressing why it is so wrong for a Prime Minister to undertake this sort of activity without consulting the leader of the opposition? You cannot, I don't believe, start dropping bombs anywhere in the world, let alone the Middle East, on a whim or on a personal decision, on an autonomous person. What is the point of parliamentary democracy if Rishi Sunak can bomb whoever he wants without the permission or support of Parliament or the opposition party? I think he probably would have got it for what it's worth, but the fact that he didn't ask, to me, seems to speak volumes. Let's get this one up and running. The number you need is 0345 6060 973. 19 minutes after 10. I coined a phrase last time we talked about this, actually, that I think is really relevant. I think it's one we'd all do well to keep in our minds. Whatever your previous opinions about previous conflicts may have been, but I am haunted by opinions past. Somewhat glibly, I wobbled so much on the Iraq war. I went on the march and then ended up on air, although I didn't have this job, essentially supporting the original intervention by Tony Blair. And last week, or on January the 11th, we made a case on this programme for the wisdom of launching attacks on Houthi positions in Yemen. I probably would still sustain the idea that if they're shooting at our ships, we shoot back at them, while dismissing the Foreign Secretary's claim that it's got nothing to do with the situation in Israel and Gaza. You can hold different opinions in your head at the same time. But I can't help feeling that the failure to consult the leader of the opposition is really, really bad. And I can't quite, at the minute, it's only 10, I can't quite see what an argument against that position would look like. The good news is there are currently 2 phone lines free for you to grab and make that argument. Why should Rishi Sunak not have consulted or informed the leader of the opposition that he was about to order the dropping of bombs in the Middle East? Emma's in Newport in Wales. Emma, what would you like to say?
So, firstly, I'm not a Sunak fan. Do not like the Tories. And secondly, my husband's in the Royal Navy. Gosh. And, so there's just, it's an ongoing thing. He's actually on the HMS Diamond before.
Okay.
I think that, obviously, it's important to remember that, yes, there is a war going on, but essentially the role of the Royal Navy is to police the seas. They do a lot more of sort of stop and search than most things that they do.
Yes.
So they've, been receiving these attacks on their ships that they provide protection for, and that includes for US aircraft carriers. And I think that when they've dropped the bombs originally and Sunak's gone to Starmer, which he absolutely should do, to say this is happening, and Starmer said, yeah, okay, go ahead, sort of thing. Not that Sunak needs permission. And I think that because he's got the go-ahead before, he's gone, yeah, okay, well, obviously Starmer's on my side with this.
This is bombing the Middle East. It's not deciding what flavour ice cream to get at the local cinema, is it? I mean,
absolutely. But I think that I think Keir Starmer, if he was in power, would probably do the same thing, because the Americans
why are they cross about it then?
We'll plan.
Why are they cross about it then?
Why are Labour cross about it? Because they should have been informed.
Right.
They should have been informed.
I don't think we can't do sort of predictive hypocrisy. We can't say what Sunak's done is wrong, but Starmer would have done the same. He's a former director of public prosecutions. He's a stickler for detail. A couple of suggestions coming in, Emma, that Sunak's done it on purpose to make Starmer look weak or to make him look outside the loop.
I don't think so. I think that Sunak is, like you've said before, like a supply teacher. I don't actually think he knows what he's doing most of the time. He has really terrible advisors. And if they've said, we've emailed, we've sent a message to Starmer, he's all right with it, instead of checking up, Sunak would just say, all right, okay, Starmer said, yeah, it's all right, we've told him. And then it all comes back to bite him on the proverbial. And also, I don't really think that this is a good sort of election strategy either, because it is the Middle East and it's so divided that I really do think that it's just hitting targets that are targeting.
I agree with that, and obviously your husband doing what he does means you've got more skin in the game, as it were, than most of us do. But as a military wife, as a naval wife, isn't it more important to you that any offence, any attack, any bombing is undertaken with proper constitutional authority? I mean, I don't agree with you that Starmer would do the same. But if people fire back, I mean, we've now bombed Houthi positions, which if the continuing carnage in Gaza can be described as war, which I'm not sure about, then the Houthis responding to British and American attacks can certainly be described as war as well, and that puts your husband it puts some of his colleagues and possibly him at some point in mortal danger, a greater danger than they were in before these missiles were fired, before these bombs were dropped, and yet Rishi Sunak has done it without any parliamentary or even political support.
Oh, absolutely. I'm a huge advocate to prevent any kind of war, and especially because a lot of the time it isn't necessary and it does just escalate things. But in this instance,
you can get your head around it. You're seeing it from the practicalities rather than the principles, which is perfectly healthy. Just as a thought, and you don't have to answer this, I don't even know if you've got a view on it. David Cameron's insistence that we mustn't accept the idea that this has anything to do with Israel and Gaza. Where do you stand on that?
Well, it wouldn't be happening if Israel and Gaza wasn't happening.
Well, that's what I thought. And yet here he is. He's the foreign secretary.
That's a ridiculous statement. If Israel wasn't, in Gaza, we wouldn't. I mean, we've put extra forces in the Red Sea because of the Israel-Gaza conflict. Yes. And obviously that has an impact on the other, either pro-Gaza, pro-Israel forces in the areas. And it's a very heated situation. And that's the time when our government does need to come together. It does need to sort of go, right, not just our government, our parliament needs to come together and say, right, this is going to happen. We kind of need you on board. And then it's up to the opposition to say whether they are on board or whether they think it's
nicely put. And they probably would be on board. But that doesn't make a case, of course, for saying, well, we didn't need to consult you because we knew what you'd say. So essentially what Cameron is saying is, you see all that smoke over there, it's got nothing to do with that fire underneath it.
which is ridiculous.
Which is ridiculous. Although, such is the genius of David Cameron, the architect of the referendum and of Brexit and of the running away in terror at the threat of Nigel Farage. Such is the genius of David Cameron. It's possible that he can see something that we can't. He is in the House of Lords after all. Thank you, Emma. Alan is in Manchester. Alan, what do you think?
Morning, James.
Hello.
Well, the 2 points. Yeah, I mean, why aren't they consulting Starmer?
Yes. Why?
It's, I just don't think Sunak's up to the job. And he's like the one
he consulted him last time. I mean, I'm not to be glib or flippant about it, but why not now? I mean, how hard is it to pick up the phone?
Yeah, exactly. And how hard is it just to say, look, we might have been caught on the hop the first time and not debated this in Parliament, but we should do it now. But the point I was making to your producer, James, before,
yes,
is that if we are getting involved in conflicts, this lot in power have run down our defences where we don't have the capacity and capability to get involved.
There's been warnings this week, haven't there, about the the decline of our naval capacity?
Yeah, we're down to 18 what they call surface escorts. That's frigates and destroyers in all money. We've got 2 carriers laid up in Portsmouth. If you send them carriers to sea, basically about 6 to 8 billion quid worth of British real estate, you need 2 Type 45 destroyers plus 2 Type 23 frigates. If you put both to sea, that is 8 surface escorts. That is half our surface escorts, and we're supposed to, do these, protect our shipping in the sea lanes. We're supposed to have a presence in NATO to protect Britain. We're supposed to also do a bit down the Falklands. They've run down the Navy since 2010. The aircraft taking part, Typhoons, we're now down to 107 frontline aircraft.
Are you were you in them? How come you know so much?
Well, because I'm a bore, but the other thing is I used to work for BAE Systems,
right.
James.
Oh, there it is. Okay.
Yeah, and I know that I worked for him for 35 years, and I know that besides chopping up 4 years of my life's work in 2010 when they destroyed the Nimrods, the anti-submarine hunters, I know that they've not ordered a single aircraft off BAE Systems. I know they've retired 244
So where does all this go? I sense that if I don't stop you, you're going to be hitting me over the head with statistics until a week next Wednesday. So where does all this lead? You're saying that we don't have the stones to get as involved as Rishi Sunak seems to want us to get, or am I misunderstanding?
What if it properly kicks off in Europe with Ukraine? And this is, our NATO allies are basically saying we don't think you're up to the job. And
yes,
the thing is, the problem, well, it's not a problem if you're in the defence industry. If Labour do get in, we will have to rearm. We will have to build up our armies below 70,000.
Again, I'm steering you back to the conversation that we're actually having rather than... And no, that's absolutely fine. I benefit from your knowledge, which is far greater than mine. But in a sentence or two, why is it so remiss or delinquent of Rishi Sunak not to consult the leader of the opposition on an issue of such import?
I always thought, I'm not as clever as probably you are, James. But I thought, how about good manners, protocol, etiquette? That's the thing we do in a democracy. How about that?
Well, if we're prepared to break international law and almost campaign on our determination to do so, then the idea of being mindful of things like etiquette, convention, tradition, or even parliamentary prerogative, for want of a better word, may not figure that highly in his thinking. Thank you, Alan. It's 10:30. Thomas Watts has your headlines. Okay, thinking caps on. Quite a few people asking me this question. I've got one answer to it, but my answer to this question completely demolishes David Cameron's claim that US and UK bombardment or targeting of Houthi positions in Yemen has nothing to do with the situation in Gaza and Israel. And that question is, why is it just us? I mean, if it's international trade that they're seeking to protect, the cost of sending ships around the Horn of Africa massively increases the cost of transporting goods from one side of the world to the other, or from one end of the Red Sea to the other. The US and UK say they are trying to protect the free flow of commerce. Why is it just the US and the UK? Because the Houthis respond by saying, and look, make no mistake, that they're very hard. There are no goodies and baddies, really, in the Middle East, however hard some people may try to persuade you otherwise. The Houthis have a history of child soldiers targeting civilians, executions. I mean, they are a bloodthirsty bunch. But the Saudi-backed government in Yemen that they are fighting against, with whom they are engaged in civil war, is the same. Well, it's the same Saudis that killed a journalist in Turkey and chopped him up. And, of course, the Crown Prince continues to have red carpets rolled out for him all over the world. So one of the grimmest realisations, I suspect, of understanding some of these issues is that if you're looking for a Second World War-style division of good and evil, then you aren't going to find one. But you have little choice but to listen to what people say when they are telling you why they are doing the things that they are doing. And the Houthis say that they are targeting ships in the Red Sea. The Iran-backed group is launching missile and drone attacks in that crucially important strait in the Red Sea, the Bab el-Mandab Strait, against naval and commercial ships in retaliation for the continuing killings in Gaza and in the hope of disrupting support for the Israeli military. So you have to accept that that's what they have said. The attacks have been carried out with the Palestinians, in solidarity with the Palestinians, over the war in Gaza. They've also said they won't stop in the face of Western military response. So if David Cameron is right, and the decision by the US and the UK to target these positions has nothing to do with geopolitics and everything to do with trade, why is it just us? 0345 6060 973. Why aren't the Chinese getting involved? Why aren't the French? 0345, you know the number, I don't need to quite keep repeating it. I'm not making any value judgments or casting anyone as goodies or baddies. I am just wondering why it is the US and the UK doing it, because if what David Cameron says is true, it makes no sense whatsoever. If it's all about the trade, why is it just us? Ludicrous to suggest that only American and British vessels use that strait. It's one of the busiest, if not the busiest, route in the world. So why is it just us? Michael's in Nebworth. Michael, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello, Michael.
I'd like to come. I'd like to refresh things a little bit.
Well, you're suggesting? You crikey, everyone's a critic. What needs refreshing?
Well, I think that I can't help thinking to myself, who voted for Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt? Who voted for Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng?
Yes.
We're supposed to live in a democracy, considering.
Oh, it's a parliamentary democracy, and we vote. The party that won the general election gets to pick the leader, regardless of who led them into the general election. It's not a massive departure with convention. No one voted for Jim Callaghan, did they, when he became Prime Minister? No one voted for Gordon Brown when he became Prime Minister. So let's not get red herrings.
Well, I think it's in your face, like we don't live in a democracy. But regarding your point regarding the Houthis, they've already said that if there's a ceasefire in Gaza, they'll decease.
Yes, they have. And so for David Cameron to say it's got nothing to do with the situation in Israel and Gaza is very odd, right?
Well, you'd have to have had a lobotomy to believe that.
Well, I don't know how much you listen to the show, Michael, but I suffer from...
I listen a lot.
Well, then you'll know that I suffer from this condition of excessive kindness and excessive empathy, is I find myself sometimes thinking, oh, it can't be that stupid. It can't be that obvious. I mean, look, there are exceptions. Susan Orr was on with Nick Ferrari yesterday, but there are exceptions where, however stupid it seems to be, it's possibly even stupider. But David Cameron must be saying something that we're missing, because if he's only saying what we think he's saying, then you're right. He is treating the country as if it's had a lobotomy.
I feel as though we live in. Like, it's interesting what you've said there, because obviously you're educated and with your programme and this and that.
Well,
but I feel as though I'm entering insanity. I mean, when I hear things regarding Ukraine, when I hear things regarding Gaza, to me, it's nailed on your face. I mean, if you look at the Ukraine situation, could you imagine the Chinese and the Russian troops in Canada and Mexico? What do you think the Americans would do about that? I mean, it seems to me so obvious. I cannot understand how other people don't get it.
Well, let me help you out. I know, but you're talking about moral imperatives, whereas the examples you cite involve treaties. So if foreign troops had invaded NATO countries, then America is compelled by treaty obligations to pile in, and Ukraine is not in NATO. And if it piled in, then it starts World War III effectively. So I don't think that's quite as clear cut.
Can I just make one final point?
Yeah, of course you can.
I mean, I can't help thinking to myself, like, Europe being flooded by immigrants. But where do the immigrants come from? Afghanistan, Iraq,
Yemen,
Libya, Syria, Ukraine. What have all those countries got in common? We've illegally invaded sovereign countries.
Well, not Ukraine. Well, in fact, no. Again, you're making me feel like a school teacher. You're doing fine when you started with Iraq or possibly Afghanistan, except, of course, for the use of the word illegal. But certainly, if you say we got stuck in, although don't forget that people don't generally have a problem with Ukrainian refugees for reasons that you'd have to ask them about, but they do have a profound problem with refugees with darker skin. I don't know whether there's a word for that or what that involves. Just, if you can, express or articulate the importance of the failure to consult the leader of the opposition, because that's the most important domestic issue. And then internationally, does anyone want to have a crack at why it's just us? Why it's just us? Because if it's all about the trade, if it's all about the trade, why isn't everyone else getting stuck in? James is in Barnes. James, what would you like to say?
Morning, James. I think there's three things here, James. I think one. Richie Sunak is just following the dangerous path of Conservative Prime Ministers, our hero, Mr. Johnson, having total disregard for government and democracy and Parliament.
And convention and international law and the truth.
Exactly. And he is just out of the same pot, clearly. But also, I don't think really it matters whether it's to do with Gaza or not. I think what they did was totally wrong without consulting Parliament, without consulting Keir Starmer. And we're not a dictatorship. It's not for Richie Sunak to decide unilaterally to drop bombs on who he so wishes. But James, don't you think it's ironic, even if it is about Gaza, as David Cameron seems to think that it's not,
yes.
But if it is about Gaza, which the Houthis say it is, isn't it interesting that we, the Americans and the British, allow what's going on in Gaza to be completely demolished with nothing done about it, but the minute there's a bit of trade, we're quick to send our ships and our aeroplanes to bomb people. I just find it...
well, maybe David Cameron's motivation is to diffuse that observation before it is even made. So however bogus or unconvincing his words may seem, they operate as a sort of fire blanket to the provocative point that you've just made, which is best expressed as saying, how come 25,000 dead Palestinians doesn't prompt a response from America and the UK, but disrupted trade does?
Exactly. And that I find even more abhorrent, quite frankly.
I mean, there are still plenty of people arguing, I think personally, with increasing fragility, that the continuing killing in Gaza is both necessary and justified. But I'm with the former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak on that one, and I don't agree. I also think, and this isn't a phone-in that we're going to have today, but I like to give you fair warning, I also think, particularly following events in the Knesset yesterday, when families of kidnapped hostages essentially stormed the chamber, I also think that Netanyahu's calculation, and remember with Netanyahu, you keep finding out that actually things are just as bad as some people feared they would be, despite the original denials that was the intended direction of traffic, the abandonment or the denigration of the two-state solution being the most recent example. At some point, someone's going to have to ask whether the continuing refusal to ceasefire and claim that it is in pursuit of hostages against the backdrop now of, and listen, I personally wouldn't trust Hamas as far as I could throw them, but they have said all the hostages will be released if Israel pull out of Gaza now and leave us alone. The sacrifice of the hostages at some point will be seen as a price that Benjamin Netanyahu is willing to pay in order to continue the the putative pursuit of the so-called eradication of Hamas. I think we're probably past that point. It's just a little uncomfortable for some people to hear it said out loud, I fear. Thank you, James. 10:45 is the time. 10:49 is the time, and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It's an odd one, really. Two questions for you, one domestic, one international. The first is, why on earth would Rishi Sunak not consult Keir Starmer? I think the answer sometimes, when you've eliminated the impossible, whatever you're left with, however unlikely must be the truth, is that he's rubbish at everything. It's amazing. I can't remember a politician who has declined so quickly in terms of opinion and perception. Everyone knew Liz Truss, apart from Conservative Party members and client journalists who propelled her all the way to Downing Street. Everyone knew that Liz Truss was a ridiculous politician. A truly ridiculous, a spectacularly ridiculous politician. You didn't need her ludicrous, economy-shattering budget to prove that. You just needed to have been paying attention, but scant attention. So everyone knew Liz Truss. There was no sort of collapse in understanding there, but an awful lot of people, partly through desperation, partly through optimism, thought that Rishi Sunak, when he talked about integrity, professionalism and accountability, that Rishi Sunak might actually be able to deliver some. And then I know he immediately gave Suella Braverman a job back in the Home Office, from which he subsequently had to fire her. So there goes professionalism and integrity, but not accountability. And now he's dropping bombs in the Middle East without consulting the leader of the opposition. So what exactly does accountability mean in the Rishi Sunak dictionary? There's a question. In fact, it works for all three words, doesn't it? In Rishi Sunak's dictionary, what does integrity mean? Because he promoted Suella Braverman back into the Home Office after she'd been fired for egregious breaches of the ministerial code. So he's rewarding an absence of integrity. She was also, as I explain in my book, How They Broke Britain, she was also, I believe, quite economical with the truth about the circumstances in which she broke the ministerial code. So what does integrity mean in this government? Or rather, in the Rishi Sunak dictionary? What does professionalism mean? And what does accountability mean? Whatever they mean to Rishi Sunak, they are not the meanings in the Oxford English Dictionary. Mary is in Ealing. Mary, what would you like to say?
Hi, thank you for the opportunity, James. You're absolutely right in asking the question. It is 100% to do with Israel and the Gaza conflict.
Well, it has to be, doesn't it?
They've said it time and time again, but this kind of news you don't get to see on Sky News or BBC. People should really switch to Jazeera English to hear it.
Well, that's owned by the Qatari government. Well, slow down, May. Sorry. Okay. That's owned by the Qatari government, and the BBC is independent. It also comes under attack from conservative politicians for being impartial. So we're not going to fall out. But I don't find. I know they're constantly accused of being anti-Israel by almost everybody on the right wing of British politics. So I find it profoundly unhelpful for people to accuse them of being biased in the opposite direction. So yeah, you're on a warning, but crack on. No, you're not on a warning. You can't encourage people to take all their news from a news organisation that's owned by a Middle Eastern country where Hamas leaders are currently sheltered and receiving sanctuary. So jog on with that as well while you're here.
No, good or bad. The Houthis have said, we will stop any ship going to Israel or owned by Israel. Now, our government has involved us directly. Now they're saying we will attack any British ships coming along.
Yes,
because of the bombing of Yemen.
Yes, again, that's all true, but I'm reading that in the Daily Telegraph today. So again, your idea that the British media is somehow not reporting this was a very unfortunate starting point because it undermines everything that you say subsequently. So from the goodness of my heart, I'm prepared to ignore the silliness of your first statement and allow you to make one more.
James, they're totally not just ignoring it, they're denying it.
Yes, that's the odd bit.
Because they have to look out for Israel's interests before ours.
Well, OK, I'll leave you to deal with the dog. 10:53 is the time. Adam is in Tunbridge Wells. There is possibly some truth in what May says. If you kind of find yourself wondering why the UK is getting involved in yet another Middle Eastern skirmish. We picked a side a long time ago in the Yemeni civil war because Saudi Arabia supports the other side. But if we're not contributing to international clamour for a ceasefire, never mind some international support for a verdict of genocide to be handed down on Israel. We're not getting involved in any of that. The death toll in Gaza has passed 25,000 and Rishi Sunak continues to sit on his hands. But when some drones attack some ships in a trading channel, he starts dropping bombs on the people responsible. I mean, it is, the more you think about it, rather extraordinary, I think. But I could, of course, be wrong. Where am I going next? Tunbridge Wells? Oh, yes, Adam is in Tunbridge Wells. Adam, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello.
If I can just make two relatively, possibly obvious points.
Yeah, go on. I've got nothing against obvious points on issues like this, Adam.
I think leaving Keir Starmer out of the conversation is sort of twofold. Firstly, that the Conservative tenure over the last few years has been a complete departure from civilised politics, as far as I'm concerned.
Good word. That's a good word. I like that adjective. Yes.
And obviously, from Rishi's perspective, it looks great when the headlines come out that Keir was not involved. It makes for those just reading the headlines, it makes it look like Keir is not important enough to be at the table. So I think it's a political tactic from that point.
Backfired, though. I think probably. I mean, I just increasingly think that Sunak is just very bad at this. So that might be the calculation, but it's not going to deliver the result that he wants.
Absolutely agree. And if I may just make a second point on why it's the UK and the US getting involved, I haven't heard anyone address this question yet. The obvious point is that the UK and the US both have elections coming up, and a la Boris Johnson visiting Ukraine, we know that it's a winner in the polls when a political leader is seen to be showing a strong hand internationally.
Yes, well, it was with Ukraine, but I think Ukraine fits the Second World War model of good and evil, or paradigm is a better word than model, whereas Middle Eastern conflicts post-Iraq traditionally don't. It's why we didn't get stuck in Syria and Libya, perhaps on the level that we should have done. But that may again be the calculation. I think it can be both, can't it? It can be 6 of one and half a dozen of the other. It can be 52% of one and 48% of the other. But I think that the failure to support ceasefires at United Nations votes puts us in a place that other countries are not in. And it is at that place that the Houthis are firing their missiles or launching their drones, and therefore to fire back, in a sense, is beholden upon the people being targeted. So maybe David Cameron is saying we're attacking them because they're attacking us. And that has nothing to do with Israel and Gaza. In a sense, he can make that argument just because you don't need to ask why they're attacking us. You just need to start the conversation at the point where they do. And then you can say it's got nothing to do. We're not firing against the Houthis because they support Israel and Gaza. We're firing on the Houthis because they're firing at us. I think that's probably, if you had the misfortune of being able to examine the entrails of David Cameron's brain, I think that is the double speak that he's come up with. It's not quite as stupid as earlier callers suggested, the one in particular who mentioned lobotomies. But he is saying, no, we're not shooting them because they support the Palestinian people, silent brackets, although that is, of course, the reason why they're shooting at us, close bracket. We're only shooting at them because they're shooting at us. So don't go further back than the point where they launched their attacks on our ships. But that, of course, still leaves you with the question of why dropping bombs is a reasonable response to trade disruption, whereas sitting on hands remains a reasonable response to a developing humanitarian disaster in Gaza. And actually that phrase takes away agency from the Israeli government. So we will go with mass killing, massacre. I don't know what word you prefer to describe the killing of tens of thousands of civilians. You can pick your own. Roy's in Horsham. Roy, what would you like to say?
James, good morning.
Hello, Roy.
One of the questions that has kind of been left in the air a bit over the past hour, and you've had some really, really good callers, is the question of capability. If I can just say for 15 seconds on the issue of informing other senior politicians,
Yes.
It takes integrity and professionalism to do that.
Yes.
And I would ask Rishi Sunak, please, to remember, you've got to take people with you. He may feel that he's informed Keir Starmer once, and that's good enough.
Yeah,
but
true.
of course, in a democracy, it isn't. So could he please get his act together and make sure that he takes senior people with him? On the question of capability, it's a really interesting one, this.
Yeah.
You've only got 2 countries who are capable of making these strikes, unfortunately.
Really?
The simple fact is it's the UK and the US. Let me just...
China could.
Yep, I'm just going to deal with China and India.
Me. Sorry.
No, it's no problem at all. They don't want to get involved politically, would be my belief. They will run their container ships around the Cape of Good Hope and charge you an extra 20 quid for your patio furniture. I think that's where they are. If you take then the Middle East countries who are capable, Israel, Egypt, Saudi, they're not going to get involved in this, which basically leaves the Europeans. Yeah. The French have got 1 aircraft carrier, which they can't put to sea. The Italians and the Spanish have got nothing, and the Germans have got even less than nothing. So when we talk about our defence capability, it's actually pretty high. We've got an air base at Akrotiri in Cyprus that covers the whole of the Middle East. So you can run your Tornadoes down to southern Yemen with some in-flight refuelling and back again. So we've got the capability of making direct strikes, whatever the politics behind that is.
Gosh.
And of course, so have the US, but there's only 2 of us. And that's got nothing to do with elections or anything else.
But it's not as if there's an international coalition of support for these strikes, is it?
There should be, and I agree with you completely.
But there isn't.
Somewhere amongst all of this, the other countries like Germany and France, who are big importers of product,
yes.
Because it's not just targeted ships that are being hit. They're hitting anything that's going through those straits, and it'll just get worse and worse until they consider there's something happening in Gaza that they respond to.
And on the question of David Cameron's instruction that we don't, that we ignore the Houthi narrative that this has anything to do with Israel and Gaza.
I have to just smile. The guy's completely out of touch. He was over Brexit, and he is absolutely out of touch over this. It's a cauldron. He needs to understand that.
You'd hope he did.
Interrelated.
You'd hope he did. I'm late for the news already, which you must take as a compliment. But I asked a previous caller this question. I'd ask you as well. How come you know so much?
Only because I spent some time at the MOD. I follow our defence capability.
Oh, is that all?
I follow our defence capability, and believe me, despite everything that everybody sees and reads, we're still a pretty capable nation. We can put some armaments into the field when we need to.
That's nice to hear.
Some people won't. Some excellent people in there as well.
Well, that goes without saying. Actually, I was talking matters military yesterday with James Blunt of all people, who of course was a captain in the army, led 30,000 troops into Pristina at the end of the conflict in Kosovo. Extraordinary conversation. But you remind me, there are some magnificent people. It's quite good to hear, actually, that things aren't as good as they could be or as they were, but they're still a heck of a lot better than they are in other countries. But as I said, I'm late for the news. It's 11:02. 5 minutes after 11. A couple of clarifications on the last hour. We'll start with the notion of an international coalition. Keith points out that the French are already there protecting French flag ships. India, Indonesia and others have sent ships, many flags heading to the North Indian Ocean to protect their flagged vessels, but not striking at the Houthis, although Australia has offered up support for the first round of attacks. And I'm pretty sure Keir Starmer would have offered his support for the second round of attacks, but Rishi Sunak didn't ask him, which is a big problem. And actually no one's picked me up on this, but I feel I should clarify further. The not taking Al Jazeera's coverage as somehow the gold standard, and to the exclusion of, for example, the BBC or anywhere else, or Sky, as May suggested, would be a very silly thing to do. But it's not a condemnation or a criticism of Al Jazeera's coverage per se. You will get reports from there that you are not getting on terrestrial British broadcasters, and they are helpful and informative. But it is, essentially part of the Qatari state, that broadcaster, and Qatar is a state that currently shelters Hamas leaders. It's also important to bear that in mind. And millions of you are telling me that the RAF no longer flies tornadoes, so we will chalk that up as a misspeak. 7 minutes after 11 is the time. I really hope this conversation works. I really want it to work, but I'm not 100% convinced that it will. I've wanted to have it for a long time, and I haven't. I think for the same reasons that Keir Starmer doesn't talk about Brexit much. I don't know that the country is ready, but I think we might be. So there were two stories yesterday, oddly, that were very interesting in the context of the next general election. The first was Keir Starmer's speech about the ludicrous demonisation of the National Trust and the Royal National Lifeboat Institute. And to be fair, only the Daily Mail really has fallen into the trap that Keir Starmer set. Even the Daily Telegraph, which often competes with the Daily Mail for the most absolutely lunatic takes upon British politics, even the Daily Telegraph resists the urge to fall into his trap and attack him on the front page. It has a slightly more nuanced swing at him later in the paper. But the Daily Mail, which lost touch with reality long before Paul Dacre lost touch with his dreams of a seat in the House of Lords, the Daily Telegraph, the Daily Mail, Starmer wades into culture wars on the side of the woke. And as we've demonstrated several times on this programme, people like this have no idea what they mean when they say woke, or rather they probably do, but they know they can't say it out loud. Because saying out loud things like, well, I don't think we should learn anything about slavery because some reasons. Or saying, I don't think that we should rescue drowning people in the Channel if they're foreign, because they can't say it out loud, so they call themselves anti-woke. And the Mail have walked headlong into the trap that Keir Starmer has set for them. And they've even quoted precisely the sort of MPs that would fall apart faster than a Jenga pile hit by a wrecking ball if you ask them to define exactly what it is that they mean by woke. And then crucially, and you can have this one for free, fellow journalists, crucially ask them for examples of what they're talking about. I can't believe in 2024, as we see the prospect of Donald Trump getting back into the White House, on both sides of the Atlantic, it is still some sort of superpower demonstrated by Kay Burley yesterday. It's still some sort of superpower for journalists to ask for examples of what a politician is saying to them. So when Lucy Fraser said the BBC is biased, Kay Burley said, give me some examples. And she couldn't. So if you ever have the misfortune of encountering an MP called John Hayes, who revels in the description of being Suella Braverman's mentor. What do you mean Suella Braverman's mentor? It's absolutely extraordinary. It'd be like being Jarvis Cocker's sumo wrestling trainer. Suella Braverman's mentor. He's adamant that this is all very awful. Woke. Ask him what he means and then ask him for examples. And they won't be able to provide you with any. But, of course, some people in my profession still find that too difficult a Rubicon to cross. So that was the first interesting story. Keir Starmer making a very simple, measured, sober case for being proud of and defending institutions that uphold fine British values like the National Trust and the RNLI. 76% of National Trust members polled wanted the properties to display more information about colonialism and slavery. But obviously the silent majority forgot to vote in that poll. So we'll park that for today because it's the B word. You might want to alert your auntie. Alert your uncles and aunties. We're going in on Brexit on the James O'Boring programme. We haven't done so for a while, but we are going to do so today. And the reason that we're going to do it is that I don't think it quite counts as smear Keir, but we should probably have a little listen to the jingle because so much effort went into creating it. And I did worry out loud that by the time we had got around to it, getting an actual jingle put together, I'd have lost my enthusiasm for the Smear Keir feature. But we probably should have done this on Smear Keir yesterday. The Mail reported Labour were accused of wanting to drag Britain back into the EU after senior party figures proposed a closer relationship with Brussels, including rejoining the customs union. This is Sadiq Khan speaking at odds with Keir Starmer's stated policies, but details like that never stop I don't even know what word to use to describe this. It's certainly not journalism. From engaging in this sort of thing. The shadow Northern Ireland Secretary Hilary Benn suggested it would make sense to link up more closely with the bloc, which is about as close to a statement of fact as it is impossible to imagine. Genuinely. Our nearest trading partners, from whom we have detached ourselves and imposed utterly unnecessary fractures that nobody who voted for them expected, understood or were warned about by their own leaders, by the people they believed, one of whom, Daniel Hannan, is inevitably quoted in the Daily... Well, he's written an article in yesterday's Daily Mail saying that Sadiq Khan wants us to pull out of the Pacific Trade Pact, scrap our deals with Australia, Canada and India, and contract out our commercial policy with no say to Brussels. Daniel Hannan, of course, encouraged you to vote against having a say in those trade policies. He was a key architect and key player in the process to remove the United Kingdom entirely from European commercial policy. Australian, you'll know the Australian trade deal was laughed at on Australian television the day that it came in. They described the benefits for Australian farmers and then asked each other what the benefits were for the Brits, to which one studio presenter replied, I don't know, maybe it's Spice Girls CDs. International laughing stock, thanks to people like Daniel Hannan. But here he is, popping up again in the Daily Mail. He serves on the UK Board of Trade, would you believe? An appointment, I believe, that was made by Liz Truss. You'd have thought anybody appointed by Liz Truss would have resigned in absolute shame when the gig was up. I could be wrong. You'll need to check. So, you know, that trade deal is not worth the paper it's printed on, whereas the European Union customs union is obviously one that is beneficial to be in. So what's the topic? What's the question? The question is this. I would like to talk either to or about people who realise that we need to do something now. People who realise that the cost of leaving the European Union is too high. All right, I certainly don't want to get into silly arguments about the Lisbon Treaty or sovereignty. Let me tell you very briefly why the sovereignty argument is a complete red herring, right? I have got a car to sell you and I want £10,000 for it. Yeah? But you don't want to pay £10,000. So either I don't sell you the car or we negotiate and come to a deal that you'll pay 9.5. All right. The minute that I agree on 9.5, I'm surrendering sovereignty because you have had an equal say in the process of what that car will cost to me. These absolute half-wits who used sovereignty as an argument for Brexit believed that we would be able to tell the rest of the world the terms and conditions upon which we would trade with them and that they would bend the knee, doff the forelock and agree. Tug the forelock even, doff the cap and agree. And the consequences of that jingoistic arrogance are probably best contained in that phrase, I don't know, maybe it's Spice Girls CDs. That's what sovereignty looks like. Believing that you get to tell the rest of the world the terms and conditions upon which they can trade with Rule Britannia, and then discovering that, in fact, they've got just as much heft as you. The Indian deal, should it ever emerge, is going to scare the bejesus out of the racists who voted for Brexit in the first place. So let's park all of that for now. Do you want the Labour Party to explicitly call for closer ties with Europe? Okay. Now that perhaps speaks... Oh, and also we forgot George Eustace, one of the negotiators of the Australian trade deal, who subsequently described it as rubbish. So do you want them to do this? Because I think I do now, but I have found myself in the last 2 months in the very strange position and slightly surprising position of recognising that Keir Starmer was right not to do things that I wanted him to do when I first wanted him to do them. On the issue of the nanny state, as it's sometimes called, and on the issue of the culture wars, as they're still laughably referred to, I think he's played an absolute blinder. I think he's timed it to perfection, and I think he has scored palpable hits. But he is still keeping his finger from the trigger of further European Union cooperation. I can't believe it's a headline that people like Daniel Hannan and whoever's editing the Daily Mail, it's a chap called Ted Verity. I can't believe that they think this will still frighten swathes of the population. Labour were accused of wanting to drag Britain back into the EU. Now, listen, if I accused you of being a witch or a dragon tamer, it wouldn't be true, would it? If I said, you're a witch, you're a dragon tamer, you are, the Daily Mail would report it as Keith was accused of being a dragon tamer. And they think that was news. They think you were so stupid that writing something down that wasn't true at all was news. So no one in the Labour Party has said that they want to get back into the EU, but some idiots have seen some words saying something completely different and claimed that that's what they're doing. So they've proposed a closer relationship with Brussels, right? Now, this is quite a nuanced question. Sometimes our Brexit phone-ins can be a bit brutal. I don't necessarily want one today, although I'm in your hands. We'll see how it unfolds. I put it to you that a closer relationship with the European Union is both inevitable and necessary for this country. We're about to get another dose of red tape at the end of this month, which we will find out more about later. But it seems to me now to be, it's the time to ignore the people who resist. The polling's pretty clear. Polling on rejoining is pretty clear, but we're not talking about rejoining. What is the best way for the Labour Party to help people climb down from positions as ludicrous as Daniel Hannan? So I really want to speak to people who voted for Brexit. You don't have to accept yet that it was guaranteed to be a disaster. You just have to accept that it's made things worse. 5,000, I mean, the number of businesses that have gone under, the number of businesses that are worried about going under, the impact on everything from the health service to hospitality. Even if you were a little bit xenophobic about things and you thought there'd be fewer foreigners, that's backfired as well. But that's got nothing to do with membership of the customs union. So that's a bit of a diversion for the purposes of this hour. What I want you to tell me, either from the perspective of being the person that I'm talking about, or from the perspective of like me, wondering how we can help. How do we help people reach a place without shame or recrimination where they can join us in saying we've got to have closer ties with the European Union? And do you want the Labour Party to do that now? Actually, switch those questions around. The second one's more important. Now that Keir Starmer has, if you like, showed some ankle on the question of nanny state and on the question of culture wars, do you think it would be politically wise for him to do the same on closer ties with the European Union? 0345 6060 973. It's why yesterday's page 4 of the Mail and today's page 1 of the Mail are so interesting. So page 1 of the Mail, he knew that was coming. Starmer wades into culture wars on the side of the woke. He knew that was coming. He dug that bear trap and they've jumped into it. So he's ready for that fight now. Is it also time for him to have the fight that they tried to preempt on page 4 of yesterday's paper? Is Labour's mask starting to slip over rejoining EU? 0345 6060 973. Is it time for Labour to say the unsayable and actually include closer ties with the European Union in its election offer for this year? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 23 minutes after 11, considering that in many ways it's the issue that made, if I have a name at all, it's the issue that made it. I do, at this point in proceedings, struggle a bit to find my way in perfectly to conversations about Brexit because I am a seagull. I'm not a trawler. Some days I'm a trawler, but mostly I'm a seagull. I can only follow the path that has been set by news organisations with much greater resources and much bigger platforms than little old me. But Brexit seems to be one of those places where our media is letting us down again. We could ask, who on earth still thinks it's a good idea? Daniel Hannan, one of the most ridiculous people ever, really, to inhabit public life, was writing in a newspaper yesterday about how awful it would be to abandon our trade deal with Australia in favour of closer trading ties with countries you can swim to. I think it's worth pausing for a minute there. Still, I mean, I think we reached the cultish stage some time ago. We probably reached the cultish stage before the vote came in, but after the vote came in and people realised that they were actually going to have to deliver on all the things, or people realised that they would be expected to deliver on all the things that they had promised, that's when everything got cultish. That's when everybody started pretending that they hadn't voted for a higher standard of living or cheaper food or any of the things that were promised, 350 million quid for the NHS. They all start, oh no, that was just, oh no, that, no. Oh dear, no, we voted for sovereignty. We voted, so, that's when everything went a little bit bonkers. But now, I mean, there's two questions really. Do you want Keir Starmer to start being warmer towards the European Union? And the second question is, would it be good politics? Is there any point? Everybody knows, really, that it's going to have to happen at some point. Saying it out loud arguably puts a target on Starmer's back, as he did yesterday deliberately with the woke stuff, without winning any new votes. Your thoughts, please, on this. Philip's in Hartlepool. Philip, what would you like to say?
Morning, James. Yeah, I really wish that Starmer would be more proactive on this, get the conversation started, to bring a bit of reality back into politics. Look, we're in a cost of living crisis. One of the, as I believe, one of the big issue around that is Brexit. We've got empty shelves. We've got people, businesses. I've got a friend who nearly went out of business because of the tariffs.
Do you think people realise? Do you think people join the dots? This is what I mean by being a seagull rather than a trawler. So listen, there's two types of responses to what you've just said that will prove my point. The first is, I just saw a shelf and it wasn't empty. Now, these people walk among us. They're the people who think that because they haven't got a cold at the moment, there's no such thing as a cold virus. But so you've got that. They're certainly not joining the dots, but that's because they're not sure what dots are. And then the second people see the empty shelves and don't believe it's linked to making trade harder with our closest neighbours. They're the sort of Daniel Hannan disciples. So if everyone who sees the empty shelves and knows it's linked to Brexit is probably already where you are, what's in it for Starmer to start pointing it out more vociferously, more robustly?
Well, he's got you go back to the figures, 52-48, you're talking about 4% of the population that Cummins managed to swing to get the Brexit through. And you talk about the 11% of the population who are overtly racist in this country and then will want boats stopped and see people drown and things.
Yes.
Starmer's got to start talking to the people who are in the background, and he's got to start talking. I'm sick and tired of PMQs every time when you didn't, Sunak will say, you didn't vote for this, you haven't got a plan for that. I wish you just turn around and say, to the point, yes, we have, and I'm not going to vote for things that are absolute rubbish. That's the reason we didn't vote for them. So Starmer's always got to walk the tightrope between the Tory press and the
that's why the argument for him keeping his powder dry comes from, though, isn't it?
I just wish he'd be a bit more grown up about it, and the extreme left of the Labour Party or old left who would never have voted for the EU, in the 70s and things, they didn't want it because I
think they're silenced now, largely. So what we've got here is Sadiq Khan and to a lesser extent Hilary Benn essentially describing the inevitability, never mind the desirability, of closer ties with the customs union. Would it be helpful or unhelpful for Keir Starmer to add his voice to those calls?
I personally think that it would. Can I just add one thing?
Very briefly.
Very briefly. The European Union was the last bastion of holding on to our rights and working time benefits and things. We're getting a free port built on Teesside, which Tory boy Ben Houchen is promoting that's going to get thousands and thousands of jobs. Those jobs are just going to move from one place to the free port.
I did say briefly, it's a valid point. A lot of people are telling me to get across this Freeport story. We've done quite a lot on it, actually, with Richard Brooks from Private Eye, who has has led the reporting. And of course, it's in terms of a phone-in, it's a little bit nebulous because most people won't know A, what's going on, or B, what to think about it. But you're right. It was one of the things. It's pretty much the only thing left when you say, what are the benefits? They say free ports. But obviously, as with sovereignty, very often they don't know what the words even mean. 11:30 is the time. Thomas Watts has your headlines. It's 11:34. Here is a really weird thing about Brexit Britain, and I must share with you some of that. Actually, I'll share it with you now. It's the 24th of June, 2025, and Britain is marking its annual Independence Day celebration. As the fireworks stream through the summer sky, still not quite dark, we wonder why it took us so long to leave. The years that followed the 2016 referendum didn't just reinvigorate our economy, our democracy and our liberty. They improved relations with our neighbours. The United Kingdom is now the region's foremost knowledge-based economy. We lead the world in biotech, law, education, the audiovisual sector, financial services and software. New industries from 3D printing to driverless cars have sprung up around the country. Older industries too have revived as energy prices have fallen back to global levels. Steel, cement, paper, plastics and ceramics producers have become competitive again. Now, the man who wrote that as a prediction of what Brexit would do for Britain by June of 2025, so approximately 18 months from now, the man who wrote that accepted money from the Daily Mail yesterday to tell its readers why the Labour Party is wrong to want to build closer ties with the European Union. I want you just to pause for a moment and consider the level of intellectual and moral fraudulence necessary to be the same person. The same person who promised improved relations with our neighbours, who promised Britain was due to become the foremost knowledge-based economy, who said that by June of next year we would lead the world in biotech, law, education, the audiovisual sector, financial services, software, who promised that older industries would be revived because energy prices would have fallen. Steel is even mentioned as becoming competitive again. You'll know that this week Tata Steel announced the closure of its facilities in Port Talbot with the loss, I think, of up to 3,000 jobs. How can that man still be paid by the Daily Mail to offer up his opinions on Brexit-related issues? It is like hiring... I don't want to do Harold Shipman jokes because I think they're too grisly, but who is... I mean, it would be like hiring Liz Truss to advise you on the economy, but the Tories are probably going to do that, or the Daily Mail might do that next. The Telegraph probably already has. But can you conceive of the idiocy involved in taking people who have been proved categorically wrong about everything and paying them, or in Daniel Hannan's case, putting them in the House of Lords so that they continue to pronounce upon the areas where they have been shown to be utterly, utterly ignorant, worse than ignorant, cultishly wrong. But I'm still not sure that Keir Starmer should be wading into this. I'm still not sure that it would be the right political move for Keir Starmer to start calling publicly for... In fact, I'll read you a reason why. I did vote for Brexit, James. I obviously wish I hadn't. I don't want Keir to mention it. I need him to win and not risk making this a Brexit election. That's from Kane. What do you think? Politically speaking, he's gone in on the woke stuff and he's gone in on the nanny state. Sadiq Khan and, to a lesser extent, Hilary Benn, both calling for closer links with the European Union. Should Keir Starmer do the same, or should he keep his powder dry? Ian's on the Wirral. Ian, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello,
Great
mate.
show. Love it.
It's all right.
I was talking to your researcher, and my view is, I think, at least Starmer should dip his toe in the water, because I think the only way... I was interested to hear what you said about the Daily Mail. The only way this country is going to prosper and survive is we absolutely have to become closer to Europe in terms of trading. We're about, as you very rightly said, the end of March and April to be hit with this ridiculous border controls on imports.
It's coming at the end of January, isn't it?
Is it the end of January?
Yeah, I'm going to get Pete Foster from the Financial Times will join us after 11:45 to talk us through what's actually going to happen. But it's the end of January, and it's a pretty big deal. The Irish government have just warned Irish businesses Well, actually, they've not just warned them, but they are warning and have warned Irish businesses about what to expect. The British government is more or less silent about it, which is bizarre.
Oh, my God. But one of the key reasons, I told you, for an Italian company for 20 years, and I was lucky enough to have the opportunity to work with people of different race, colour, creed, all from Europe and different parts of the planet, travel to Europe, and to deny young, intelligent, hard-working people that opportunity through the ridiculous barriers that have been put up with the Brexit deal, for me, is criminal.
Yeah, but you know that I agree with you, but that doesn't mean it would be the right thing for Starmer to do politically at the moment.
I think politically, James, I talk to a lot of people. I think he has to, at some stage, grasp the metal. I mean,
I know that. I agree with that as well. Sorry, I'm badgering the witness. I agree with that as well, but I'm not sure it's at this stage.
So we get elected. So Starmer gets elected first, and then brings in the policies.
I think he waits until it becomes until it becomes absolutely inarguable, almost uncontroversial.
I'm kind of persuaded, but I do think it doesn't stop him from slightly dipping his toe in the water. Me, even say he agrees with Sadiq Khan or Hilary Benn, I don't know. It is a dangerous thing because I think the right wing, as you say, the right wing press, supported by the percentage of idiots that read it in this country, which is probably a high percentage of people like things like the Daily Mail.
Yes.
They are so influential, James. People sit at home, and I live in an area where the demographic is a lot of retired people.
But I think these people that you describe might be thinking about voting for Keir Starmer.
Do you?
Yeah, I do now. I think that's why they're getting so spooked. It's why smear Keir has become a thing, isn't it? And therefore, if he gives them ammunition to say, because with respect, the people that we're talking about probably don't fully appreciate the idiocy of how they voted in 2016, and they're unlikely ever to acknowledge it. If you tell him he's going to take away that glittering prize that they definitely won, although can't describe, he's less likely to win their votes. I wonder whether politically staying silent wins more votes than saying what you and I would like to see him say.
Possibly you're right, but the investment that would bring in would be phenomenal, particularly in places like the Port of Liverpool, in my area of the world, where there's a lot of EEC investment in regeneration that's gone on. People forget that.
Well, Port Talbot, Ian, had huge amounts of EU investment. Port Talbot, ironically, and I don't like the word ironically because it's often a bit, a bit arch, a bit sneer, ironically. But that was the vote in Port Talbot was the reason why Carol Cadwallader had launched her investigations into how so many people had ended up voting against their own interests. And there is, one of the... the liars who sold you Brexit are claiming that Port Talbot is somehow linked to net zero, which has become the latest conspiratorial campaign, secretly funded and shilled for by various organisations coming out of the environs of a road called Tufton Street in Westminster. But Tata Steel have certainly not done anything in Wales as a consequence of net zero concerns in the British government. They've closed it down because it has become considerably less viable than it was before, and part of the reason for that may or may not be Brexit. I think it is. Some people can argue that it isn't. But if the people that sold you Brexit are telling you that it's all because of net zero, you can be 100% confident that it's not, because they are liars and frauds, every single one of them. But does Keir Starmer win anything by joining Sadiq Khan and Hilary Benn in acknowledging the inevitability of a move back into quite a lot of people following Kane's lead? Sarah says, I'm exactly the same. There's no point in him saying anything. All he will do is scare off voters. It's weird politics, isn't it? And worries that Starmer wasn't very good at it, at dissipating with these interventions on culture wars and nanny state. But whose vote does he win? Who's sitting there now thinking, well, I quite like old Rishi Sunak, but I hate Brexit. So if Starmer comes out a little bit more strongly about rebuilding bridges with our closest trading partners, then, he's got... I don't know that there's a vote out there he could win. Andrea is in Huntley. Andrea, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello, Andrea.
I live in the northeast of Scotland, and I'm more socialist than Keir Starmer is. However, one of the reasons I think he could win votes in Scotland is because Scotland didn't want to leave the EU in the first place.
That's true.
We voted against Brexit. We had a huge amount of European funding over many, many years. There's little blue signs all over the place saying paid for by the European Union. And with the SNP saying that we would rejoin Europe, I think he could actually get a much stronger vote in Scotland than he would without dipping his toe in.
So he stays silent, or no, he doesn't stay.
No,
so sorry.
I think he should actually
because he'd be taking vote. God, you've reminded. Yes, that is a Scottish perspective, and it's completely at odds with the arithmetic or the calculation south of the border, isn't it? And I think you're completely right, because if his big challenge is to win votes from the SNP, not from the Tories in Scotland, and part
Absolutely.
of the SNP offer. But that's rejoining after independence, so. He can offer up a compromise position, which is we will build stronger ties.
Yes, and I think that would really win votes in Scotland. And, up until recently, the SNP have been so much in control. They are losing some support. But I think if he went in with that, he could actually win seats in Scotland, which would really benefit him.
And you don't feel that he's done enough already, because he has sort of talked about rebuilding and rewriting and doing a better job.
It's not making any inroads.
How does it?
From amongst,
How does it? Even if he did, the only way you would find out that Keir Starmer had called for closer ties with the European Union is by turning this radio programme on and hearing me read out the attacks on him from right-wing newspapers. How else would it reach you, that news?
That's it. It doesn't.
Isn't that crazy?
It just doesn't. Yes, it's ridiculous.
I've only just realised that.
Yeah, it's absolutely ridiculous.
Where else would he go? He could give an interview on the BBC, but unless it got picked up by the newspapers, most of us wouldn't be aware of it. And, of course, most of the newspapers are mad now in this country. They're so mad. The Times is now edited by a man who previously edited both the Daily Telegraph and the Sun. And before that, he was deputy editor of the Daily Mail. That's how mad British newspapers are. And, of course, they love nothing more normally than telling you about something awful that's about to happen. That is pretty much the business model now of British newspapers. Something awful has happened, and it's all the fault of them over there. Foreigners, socialists, single mothers, unemployed people, Gary Lineker. They love telling you about awful stuff, but they're not going to tell you about what's happening at the end of January, because it is absolutely impossible to argue that it's not a consequence of Brexit. They can argue that all the other stuff, the shelves are just empty because of moths. It's got nothing to do with Brexit. I went to France last week and I couldn't find a kumquat for love or money. So food shortages are everywhere. Just because you've got actual pictures of food on the shelves in your local Sainsbury's doesn't mean that, no, nonsense, nothing to do with Brexit. I went to a shop yesterday and it didn't have any shortages at all. Therefore, reports in the news from the sector that there are shortages must be ignored. Nothing to do with Brexit. I can't hire anyone. I can't find any staff for my pub or my shop. Nothing to do with Brexit. There's loads of people coming here. They just don't want to work in your shop because you're not paying them enough wages. But I am literally offering more than I've ever offered before, and no one is applying. No, nothing to do. No staff shortages. No. Okay. Well, I work in the NHS. We're 100,000 nurses shy of what we need. No, nothing to do with Brexit. Nothing to. When you tell people to sod off back to where they came from, they're not going to. So it's all going on. End of January. New rules come in, new import-export rule come in, and it would be impossible for anyone to pretend it's not a direct consequence of Brexit, which is why 80% of the British media won't even tell you about it. So I will after this. It is 10 to 12 already. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The next hour, the story I can't take my eyes away from is the one about the school that is being sued by a pupil because the school won't let her pray. And it sounds like a no-brainer, and an awful lot of people lining up on the side of that conversation that I think I'm on are people that I very rarely find myself allied with. So I think we might return to that after 12. The case is ongoing. The commentary has gathered pace, and yet for me, some of the central issues there remain intractable. We're going to talk now about what's happening at the end of the month with regard to Brexit. Even I find it hard to keep up with some of the developments. I'm pretty sure, and we shall check in a moment with someone who will definitely know, I'm pretty sure that what is about to happen is the thing that Jacob Rees-Mogg, during one of his weird tenures in a ministerial position, is the thing that Jacob Rees-Mogg decided not to do or insisted that we shouldn't do because it would be so damaging. It would be an act of self-harm. But I think we have to do it now that we're no longer in the single market or the customs union. That's the thing about bogus beliefs in sovereignty. If you want to sell something into France or Germany or Portugal or Spain or anywhere else in the single market, you abide by their rules. And if you want to buy something from there, you abide by their rules as well. It's funny that, isn't it? Up to a point. So I think what we're about to see at the end of January is the stuff that Jacob Rees-Mogg described as being very, very bad for British business. But I could be wrong. Thankfully, Peter Foster is here, the public policy editor for the FT and author of What Went Wrong with Brexit, which is a absolutely splendid and very easily digestible book. And Pete joins me now. So what is happening at the end of January and how big a deal is it?
So you're right, James. What we're doing is we're starting to phase in a border, because for the last 3 years, all of our exporters, when they send stuff into the EU, have faced a full panoply of checks from the EU. But going the other way, EU exporters sending stuff to us, they've had a free pass. And that isn't actually really sustainable. It's going to cost business £500 million a year, but we can't really have no border, partly because it's just unfair. So we are starting to phase in a border. So from the 31st of January, everyone sending any plant or animal linked product is going to need what's called an export health certificate. So that's a long certificate you have to get stamped by a vet. And then from the end of April, there's going to be actual physical inspections on fairly low percentages of stuff coming in. And then from October, everything's going to have what's called a safety and security declaration. Now, all that stuff is complicated, but what you really need to know is that for EU exporters feeding into UK supply chains, they're going to start feeling some Brexit pain for the first time.
And that, of course, for every EU exporter, there's a UK importer.
Trade goes both ways. That's exactly right. So if you make cakes and you're reliant on liquid egg product from Poland, then you've got to make sure your supplier has a vet and has all the paperwork in order so that that liquid egg can come across. And there are certain sectors where there is lots of concern among the chilled food industry and the meat industry, particularly pig meat. We import 780,000 tons of pig meat, from a lot of it from Denmark, a lot of it from Germany. And there's just concern, for example, that there aren't enough vets in Germany to stamp all these certificates, because you actually have to really know the meat is safe and know where it's come from. It's not as easy as just rocking up and putting a stamp on. And the vets over there, they're civil service, not private sector. Are they going to work on the weekends? Are they going to show up in sufficient numbers? Are the exporters going to be bothered to get it straight? And I think that's where you're going to start to see pinch points in the supply chain.
Because if I'm the Polish liquid egg supplier or the Danish bacon purveyor, I don't have to do any of this if I'm selling it into Paris or Frankfurt or Lisbon.
No, indeed, not inside the single market. And I think, as we saw with the other way, James, when the EU brought the border in 2021, a lot of small UK producers just gave up. Just wasn't worth the candle.
Or got bought out or opened up facilities in Europe and in order to keep supplying their European customers. But of course, the smaller the outfit, the less likely that was to be an option in the first place. And businesses continuing to go under. If I ask you a silly question, do you promise not to laugh?
Go on.
All right. Why do we have to do it? Could we not just be buccaneering rule Britannia waives the rules and just say, well, you can import, we don't have any rules whatsoever. You can import. I mean, I can see the downfalls and the potential pitfalls in that, just things like botulism and salmonella and maggots and all that kind of thing. But, Daniel Hannan and Jacob Rees-Mogg, they're not going to be affected by things like that because they'll still be buying the premium brands. Why can't we just let Europeans import whatever they want into this country with no checks or borders at all?
Well, I think I'll tell you what the government answer to that question is. Well, first, it's a WTO point, right? You can't have checks on all the stuff coming from all around the rest of the world and then give one particular trade partner a free pass, right? That's a level playing field point. The trouble is the WTO is broken. So truthfully, it'd take a long time to get in trouble with the WTO. Yeah. I think the other point is it's a very unequal situation. We can't have a one-way street effectively. And so, there's two fallouts from this. Well, on the upside, it might be that once the EU start to feel Brexit pain, they're more keen on getting around the table to work out technical and other solutions to fix it. The trouble with that is, remember, we're 53% of our trade is with Europe. For them, it might be 8-9%. So the incentive is much reduced. On the other hand, they may just decide that dealing with the UK at the margin is just more trouble than it's worth. And so it just creates more barriers between UK, GB and EU, and that just will end up reducing our trade with Europe. I think to say we have no border probably isn't sustainable, whatever Jacob Rees-Mogg said.
And, so the best case scenario is actually the thing that Sadiq Khan is calling for, which is an opportunity, because at the moment it doesn't matter how loudly Labour politicians or any other politicians, SNP politicians, Liberal Democrat politicians call for closer ties with the European Union. There's absolutely nothing beholden upon them to provide them or even to sit down and talk about them. But if they're access to our markets gets harder, then they might be interested in reaching some sort of arrangement. And that is so the best case scenario is the thing that Hilary Benn and Sadiq Khan were attacked yesterday for suggesting by the Daily Mail.
Well, indeed. So imagine a world where there's a Labour government who wants closer ties with Europe. It's not ideologically kind of committed to a zero-sum relationship. In that scenario, actually, a lot of this stuff goes away, James, because Labour want to do what's called a veterinary agreement.
Yes.
So we basically accept all EU rules on plant and animal products, which is one of the big hold-ups at the border.
Yeah.
And then actually that makes the whole Northern Ireland thing more difficult. Remember that trade border in the Irish Sea between GB and Northern Ireland? Well, a lot of that would go away as well. So we'll see. But that means a lot of rule taking. There are bits of the UK.
And they are, of course, no longer rules in which we have any say whatsoever. Finally, Peter Foster, the promises prior to 2016 that we would retain tariff-free trade arrangements with the European Union, and perhaps more crucially, frictionless trade with the European Union. They have now. They are now irrefutably dead in the water.
There was never going to be frictionless trade.
Well, I know that, and you know that, but people like Daniel Hannan told us that there would be.
They thought they were going to have their cake and eat it, and ultimately we're outside the single market. And as you said at the top, there's a single rule book, single referee, play by the rules, play by the referee. You can play. If you don't, you can't. And that's the end of it,
I'm going to tempt you off your patch now, and you'll probably tell me to wind my neck in. But because this is the conversation we've been having for the last hour, is there anything in it politically for Keir Starmer at the moment to start calling for closer ties, or to start calling to just reading the political runes rather than the trade or economic ones? Can you see any benefit in it for him, or is he wiser to keep sitting on his hands, keep his powder dry?
I can see why he doesn't want to reopen this poisonous argument that's poisoned our politics and been just so miserable for the last 6 or 7 years. If I was him and I wanted to be the fastest growing economy in the G7, I would be more upfront about the fact that we have to fix our trading relations with Europe, and that is going to require, for the first time ever, for the first time in 40 years, a Prime Minister who's actually actively arguing the case for moving closer to Europe. And that isn't about, sovereignty. We all trade sovereignty in all respects, but it's about saying, do we want to have a car industry? Do we want to be in the game for electric vehicle supply chains? Do we want our high-value manufacturers to be playing a proper part in European supply chains? Because if we don't, all of that is friction, drag, cost. And if you want to be the fastest growing economy in G7, and we all need growth to fund public services that are on their knees right now, that argument is going to have to be had. And it's not about people who vote for Brexit was stupid. It's not about sovereignty, emasculation. France is a perfectly sovereign country, and it's a member of the EU single market.
Of course it is.
And so, that's the argument I would make. I would say, it's about our prosperity.
Before an election?
Well, that's a tricky one, isn't it? Because, they're just worried the Tories are going to say they're selling out our Brexit.
Of course, they already are. Yes.
The Red Wall voters, are at risk of feeling cheated, etc. But I would just do it without using the B word. I'd say,
that's a good
we
point.
need better trade relations with our biggest market.
Put it like that, it should never even have been controversial in the first place. But here we are. Pete's book, What Went Wrong with Brexit, is available now in all good bookshops, and of course his work at the FT as public policy editor continues to set the very highest standards. And we're doing an event together, actually, at the Hay Festival this summer. I haven't got the date in front of me. But I have got one date in front of me. I'm in Wolverhampton on February the 2nd, Friday, February the 2nd. I'm on stage in Wolverhampton at Wolfram Halls. There's still some tickets available, so do come along to that if you can. 2 minutes after 12 is the time. 5 minutes after 12 is the time, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I like this. Steve from Manchester has been in touch to say Kidderminster are in good hands with Phil Brown. He was a brilliant number 2 to Big Sam at Bolton. It's a bit niche, that, Steve, but I appreciate it. It certainly got off to a flying start, 2-0 down to 4-2 up, which is, you can't say fairer than that. However, that is not what concerns us most this hour. We had a conversation. Everybody's weighed in on this now. There is a school in London that is run by someone who has managed to cultivate a PR reputation as being the strictest head teacher in the country. I've got no idea whether that's true or not. I'm of a generation that used to routinely get beaten by teachers, so strictness is a movable description, isn't it? It's that doesn't happen anywhere anymore, or at least not legally. But the kind of people who normally believe in freedom of expression, or who claim that freedoms are under threat from wokeness or from the tofu-eating wokerati or the mob, they oddly have rather taken a shine to this woman and this school, not least because they are in court fighting a Muslim pupil from the school who wants to be able to pray during break. I love this story as a phone-in host. I've got to be honest with you. It speaks to so many of the areas that I find fascinating. The row blew up because the girl, and it is a girl, I had some messages the first time we had this conversation say, well, it's a shame the girls aren't allowed to pray, isn't it, James? And then some hashtag medieval nonsense. But it's a female pupil who has brought the case. As I understand it, she decided that she wanted to pray during break. And because prayer mats are not allowed, the school pursues a policy of secularism. Because prayer mats are not allowed, she knelt on her anorak, she knelt on her school coat. And subsequently, all manner of things have kicked off. All manner of things. And I don't know that it is actually very clear. So I'll say something to you, and I don't mind. I'm happy to offend people if I'm doing it deliberately. I always regret offending people accidentally, unless, of course, your offence is ridiculous, in which case that's a you problem, not a me problem. But I find it perfectly easy to believe that the act of prayer in this context could be an act of rebellion. And as a very rebellious schoolboy, well, obviously not anymore, but as a formerly rebellious schoolboy, and I went to a monastic school, so I understand the what's the word I want? I understand the role that religion can play in schoolboy rebellion. I always had this fantasy, I never did it, but I always thought that if I went to make a confession to my own housemaster, you were not allowed to make a confession to your own housemaster for fairly obvious reasons. Because if the housemaster has put out, if the boy who stole the altar wine, an empty bottle was found around the back of the sacristy, someone has stolen a bottle of altar wine and drunk it. If the boy who did that does not make himself known to me by tea time tomorrow, I will cancel all leave this weekend. And my plan was always, I'll slide into confession and I'll tell him in confession that I did it, and he won't be able to do anything about it. So I would have come forward and told him that I've done it. But under the rules of confession in the Catholic faith, the priest is not allowed to do anything with information that is given to him in the confessional. You can even confess to murder, supposedly, without the priest being able to go and turn on the information to the authorities. So that's what I mean about having an understanding of how you might use a religious practice in a mischievous, rebellious way. So you don't know and I don't know how devout this school pupil actually is. But I'm not sure in the greater scheme of things that actually matters. Because the problem with religion is that it opens the door to the abstract. It opens the door to it doesn't just open the door, it smashes open all the doors to the utterly unprovable. Why are you doing that thing over there? Well, it's my religious right. Well, I'm sorry, but you're not allowed to do it. Well, you can't stop me. I always think back to that British Airways worker who thought she should have the right to defy a jewellery ban while working at British Airways because she wore a crucifix, and she got taken up by precisely the sort of media outlets that are now siding with this school against another apparently devout follower of religion who wants to be left alone to follow their religion. So, I mean, there might be a question here about how a commentator can be on the side of a woman who thinks she should be allowed to flout a jewellery ban that's in place for health and safety reasons, but against a young woman who wants to be able to pray in her spare time. It's mad, isn't it? But I actually think the school are right. In a position of pure principle, I think it's perfectly reasonable for school governors to ban prayer rituals. I think that they can be divisive, and I think that they can be dangerous in the sense of bullying or coercion. There are reports, and again, unfortunately, the head teacher has, I don't know whether it's her or people around her, but there is an unfortunate habit of details from the background of this case making their way into the newspapers. For example, there were allegations about the young woman involved in the case that were in some right-wing newspapers yesterday. It was revealed mysteriously in right-wing newspapers that she was receiving legal aid to bring her case. Now, I don't know how this apparently confidential information makes its way into right-wing newspapers. I wouldn't dare to speculate, but it's why some of the... And it is indeed true that Suella Braverman, of all people, was on the board of the school when it was founded. She had some role in the foundation of the school. And Suella Braverman, of course, is not somebody who is committed to freedom of expression or freedom of opinion or freedom of assembly. So all of the people, oddly, who seem to be lining up on the side of the school, I think would be on the different side of the argument if it was... The woman with the crucifix at the baggage handlers. But I'm digressing because the question I've got for you is quite spectacularly simple. That's the detail, right? So a child at a school started praying during break and lots of other children joined in. And the school said, you can't do that anymore. And now the child has gone to court. There are reports, and the rationale for the school in banning it would include the fact that some people were being coerced into joining in. Others were being told that their behaviour was irreligious, that you shouldn't be singing or listening to pop music. It's haram. As I've mentioned, it's a Muslim schoolgirl in this case, but I would love to have this conversation in a way that ignored the flavour of religion and focused instead upon the principles and the practicalities. Because I'll tell you what, some of the people siding against this young woman are siding against her precisely because she is a Muslim. I saw Nick Timothy, who was advising Theresa May at the Home Office during the period of hostile environment and the go-home vans. He used the word Islamist in the context of a schoolgirl going to court to defend her right to pray. Can you believe that? Do you think he'd have done that for a Christian? Would he have called it a Christian fight? Hello, I'd like to say some prayers during morning break, please. I'm a Catholic. I'm at a non-religious school, but I'm going to go and say some prayers in the corner of the playground. I might even kneel down. There was a kid like that at my school. I'm not going to lie to you, he was a bit weird. He used to shuffle up to communion on his knees. It was a little bit Opus Dei, or hair shirt, self-flagellation. He was kind of from that school of thought. So it is perfectly reasonable to imagine that he would have sat down, or rather knelt down, in the corner of the playground at morning break and said a few Hail Marys, right? And then some other lads decided to join in. And the point at which the head teacher said, you're no longer allowed to do that, guess what? That's the point when I joined in. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. That's the point when I would have. That's what I mean by the conflation of religiosity with schoolboy mischief or schoolyard mischief here. The point at which the teacher said, you're not allowed to say a Hail Mary in the playground, is the point at which I'd say, I'm terribly sorry, sir. I think you'll find that my freedom of religion is protected under the European Convention of Human Rights. So, it's a mad story, right? And it's getting madder, including that ludicrous balloon, Nick Timothy, trying to make it a conversation about Islamism and importing problems from and he, of course, gets paid by the Daily Telegraph for his bilge in the same way that Daniel Hannan gets paid by the Daily Mail for their bilge, and no prizes for guessing whether opinion columns in both of those pages have come down. Both of those papers have come down. But I still think I'm on the side of the school. Until you ask me the next question. And that question is this. How do you impose it? And I don't think the court has to consider that question, or does it? I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. How do you impose it? So imagine me and 30 mates in the corner of my playground doing a rosary at morning break, and a rule introduced by the school that we are not allowed to. So we are currently kneeling down in the playground doing a rosary. At this school, the Michaela Academy, I think it's called, in London, they are kneeling down in the corner of a playground, observing saying their prayers. And the school have banned it. How are you going to do that? How are you going to impose this ban? It's a genuine question, and I think it's probably the most important. And as far as I'm aware, for all the acres of newsprint that have been expended on this issue, no one's asked this question yet. In fact, if they have, don't tell me, because I'm feeling quite pleased with myself. I know what you're thinking. Nothing new there, James. But how do you impose it? Genuine question. Teachers are probably going to have a better insight into this than priests or judges. How on earth do you impose it? 30 kids in the corner over there doing the rosary, 30 kids over there facing Mecca, saying their prayers. The school have banned prayer rituals. That means they've banned the rosary. What do you think the Daily Mail would be doing if a kid in Christchurch had been told that they weren't allowed to say a rosary in morning break? Little Johnny, little Billy St. John saying his rosary. There'd be a picture of him. Probably on page 5, there'd be a picture of him holding his rosary with his angry-looking mum standing next to him, and little Billy St. John holding his rosary, looking at the camera like little Lord Fauntleroy crossed with Oliver Twist. If it was a Christian kid who was being banned from saying the rosary in his playground, it'd be an all-points bulletin. We'd be talking about nothing else. There'd be absolute uproar. And there's been some uproar at this school in London from supporters of the Muslim kids' right to pray. There have been accusations of Islamophobia. And again, mysteriously, abuse of one teacher in particular has made its way into the right-wing newspaper. It's almost as if, and I'm sure this isn't the case, that people are briefing right-wing newspapers even as a court case continues because they're keen to control the media narrative regardless of what verdict the court hands down. It's almost as if they're priming columnists to write articles about why they think the court got it wrong. But I still agree with the school. Why? Because it's divisive. Because religion is divisive. Because any group of children that is separating itself from another group of children in the context of unprovable beliefs is bad for the academic environment. It's bad for everything. What is saying a rosary? A rosary is, physically, it's a beaded necklace with each bead representing a prayer, most of which are Hail Marys, but you throw in a few glory beads as well. And I think I forget the full details. I'll probably be excommunicated. But it's a recognisable prayer ritual definitely in the Catholic Church. I can't say whether or not it's a more widely practiced Christian tradition, but it's a prayer ritual in the Catholic Church. The question I don't think we can get into is what we think all of the columnists lining up to attack this pupil or to support this school would do if it was a Catholic kid saying a rosary in the corner of the playground. But that's not the point. Here's the question I've got for you, right? Hit the numbers now. You will get through. Ready? How do you impose it? 0345 6060973. 20 kids over there saying a rosary, 20 kids over there facing Mecca. They're all saying their prayers. The school have banned it. They've banned prayer rituals. How did the school impose it? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060973 is the number you need. You're banned from praying, banned from prayer rituals. How on earth do you impose that rule? 23 minutes after 12. It's a funny one, isn't it? You can quite freely believe that if it was a story about 30 children saying a rosary in the corner of a school that is irreligious, a school that is not religious, you can believe to your heart's content that it would have been reported identically. But it's Muslim children praying in a non-religious school, and it's ended up in court. Bushra is in Ickenham. Bushra, what would you like to say?
Hi,
Hi, James. So I wanted to call in because...
well, you have.
Yes, because I have a different view to your view. You support the school, I don't. But let me explain why. So I'm a British Muslim, and I do pray 5 times a day. And you wanted to take sort of the Muslim bit out of the conversation and look at it a bit more generically. I don't think you can, because...
But I already have.
So I'll explain why. So Muslim prayer is about connecting with God, and Islam is a way of life.
All prayer is about connecting with God.
Of course.
Just to clarify, the Michaela Academy is a non-religious school, and you know that when you decide to send your child there.
So my small point, James, was going to be on the timing. So, God has advised us to pray at certain timings, and one of the timings is around sort of that lunchtime period. So I think that's one point, because another religious prayer ritual might be moved sort of after school, but again. If you send your child to this school, you do understand that they won't be allowed to engage in any prayer rituals, don't you? So this is my problem, because it doesn't sound very British to say for 5 minutes this child can't go in a quiet place and pray. I'll tell you where it's all gone wrong. My analysis.
I think they can go into a quiet place and pray, but they can't go into the playground en masse.
No, I think the prayer has been banned completely in the school. I think that is the issue.
You can't do that. They could ban kneeling, perhaps, but they can't ban praying, because no one knows that you're praying.
But that's what they are trying to do.
Well, how can you do that? I'm praying now.
So this is again where the Muslim prayer comes in, because it is a physical, visible prayer.
So you can't. Then you'll have to forgive my ignorance. So you can't pray unless you're on the ground.
Oh,
you can. Right.
You can. Of course you can. I could just sort of right now just pray while I'm talking to you.
Yes.
But
I think you should.
But that's a different type of prayer. Now, James,
so what you've done there, helpfully, is distinguish between prayer and prayer ritual. So what they're not allowed to do in the playground is a prayer ritual, which rather undermines the point about British values that you made earlier, because there isn't really any prayer ritual that you would file, I don't think, under British values, because the Church of England, the state religion, essentially, during the Reformation, eschewed the prayer rituals that were beloved of Rome and the Catholics. So I might still be saying my rosary, but I don't know that there's any comparable practice that the average Anglican would undertake.
But James, can I give a suggestion?
Of course.
Do you not think it would have been better for this group? I mean, clearly she's a great head teacher, to have addressed. She achieves very high results.
Well, that's a different conclusion, but the point stands.
I mean, that's the reputation that follows her. But wouldn't it have been better if she had addressed what sounds like bullying going on, pressurizing of other children to pray, rather than banning something altogether?
Yes, I think it might have been. I think that you've asked me a slightly different question. You have to presume they did. I don't know what you can do about that. You can march up to a child and say, stop encouraging that child to pray. I mean, it's even odder in a sense. But here's the question that makes you win.
Yes.
How do they impose it?
Well, they can't. And also, why is this school special, James? Because as a Muslim parent, you may not know, but I know that majority of high schools in Britain are very supportive of Muslims, or any other Muslim child wants to pray at lunchtime, and often have a designated quiet area. It doesn't bother anyone, and they go and pray. If they had just done that, rather than ending up in court, it would have taken a lot of stress and tension away from this head teacher.
See, here's the difference.
Child.
No, you're right. And we can agree to disagree, because I think you're right about the school failing to focus on the bullying or the intimidation. That could have been dealt with. You're right that most schools easily accommodate prayer at break or at lunch. It can even be overseen by a staff member. I don't know that my argument about it being divisive stands up to particularly robust scrutiny. However, I am in favour of schools that have have no religion in them whatsoever, in the same way that the entire French education system has managed to achieve that, as far as I'm aware. The problem then is, so we can disagree about whether it's a good idea or a bad idea, but we can agree completely on the apparent impossibility of imposing it.
I'm not suggesting it should be in the curriculum. If someone goes to a quiet room at lunchtime and doesn't impose it on anyone else, I think that's
so the more you talk about it, the more the school have messed it up. Even though I still support the idea of secularism in education. Probably, Busher, because I'm so scarred by the monks that taught at my school, and I got off lightly compared to some of my mates.
I'm okay with secularism, but if you want to go into a quiet room and pray and not impose it on anyone, it's still a secular school. I'm not.
But then you're banning missionaries.
Banning missionaries in schools?
Yes.
Well,
it's one of my greatest duties as a Christian is to go out and I shall be a fisher of men. Jesus told me to be a fisher of men. I wouldn't be able to do that at this school. I wouldn't be able to go out to someone else in the playground and say, why don't you come to our prayer meeting this afternoon? I don't know. It's a funny one, isn't it? I told you it was a lot more nuanced than a lot of the coverage allows. But my favourite question remains, how do you impose it? Are you going to suspend people for praying? Because I'll tell you now that if that were Christian kids being suspended for praying, the coverage of this story in most of the British media would be a little bit different from what it is today, a point that I suspect Busher appreciates all too well. The time now is 12:30, and Amelia Cox is here with your headlines. 12:34 is the time. Rishi Sunak on his feet in the House of Commons giving a statement on the latest strikes on Houthis, although you have to wonder why he's bothering. He did it without any consultation of either Parliament or Leader of the Opposition. So, I mean, it doesn't matter what he says now, does it? It doesn't undo what has been done. I suppose an explanation might be helpful or welcome, but be interested, much more interested in how Keir Starmer responds to it. And we will find out, time permitting, before handing over to Sheila Fogarty at 1 o'clock today. Before that, there must be an American election in the offing because Simon Marks is on the line, LBC's Washington editor. It is the New Hampshire primary that concerns us, Simon, and it is the first toe-to-toe battle between Donald Trump and Nikki Haley, about whom I'd like you to tell me a bit more first.
Well, yes, and if you're in the mood for a toe-to-toe battle between Donald Trump and Nikki Haley, James, I would really focus on what happens today because I've got a feeling that by tomorrow there might not be another one. Nikki Haley is the former governor of South Carolina and, of course, famously, Donald Trump's former US ambassador to the United Nations until she pulled off an absolutely unique feat. She left Donald Trump's inner circle. She wasn't forced out. It was her decision to go, to quit that role at the United Nations, and she did so in a manner that did not spark any kind of ad hominem attack by Donald Trump against her. In fact, she was even invited to the White House, where Donald Trump paid a fulsome tribute to the role that she had played at the United Nations. At the time, we all suspected that she might be thinking of mounting a presidential run in 2024. She didn't actually get into this race until far too late in the day. That's one of the reasons why she has struggled so badly to make much of an impact. But certainly in the last few weeks, she has portrayed herself as the only man or woman that could stop Donald Trump in his tracks. What she is going to discover today in New Hampshire is that she's unable to do so. She wasn't able to do it in Iowa last week, where she disappointed even herself by placing third, and she's not going to be able to do it in New Hampshire. The closing poll in New Hampshire, published on the eve of the primary, showed that Donald Trump has extended his lead over her. He's got 60 points, 60% of support among likely Republican voters today to Haley's 38%. So she's going down to defeat. And, it's an extraordinary moment, this, because we always traditionally sort of look at the New Hampshire primary as the big moment of excitement. This is the beginning of a long trek to the nomination for the leader of the party, whether Democrats or Republicans, and we're all going to spend the next multiple Tuesdays up until 1 o'clock in the morning waiting for that final vote to be counted in, Kansas or South Dakota. Well, on this occasion, forget it. It is all over. He is absolutely going to be the Republican Party's presidential nominee.
And I mean, I think that the challenge once again for the media is how to report the abnormal and under within the parameters of normal reporting. But he is saying, even by his standards, some extraordinarily awful things. Legal battles aside, indeed legal resolutions aside, judge has had to remind people recently that he has been found to have raped somebody. This hasn't dented his popularity among the base one jot. But he's also talking about dictatorship in terms that would normally be chilling, but which in modern America are to be expected.
Yes, I mean, to be fair to Donald Trump, he has insisted that he will only be a dictator on day one of his presidency. But of course, that's nonsense, because to achieve his day one goals, which he defines as drill, baby, drill, in other words, trampling over environmental protections designed to prevent oil drilling from taking place all over the country, and sealing the border entirely. I mean, how you seal a 2,000-mile
I thought he said he was going to do that last time.
Yeah, he said he was going to build a wall last time. Now he's talking about on day one sealing it. Well, no president has the power to do that. So even if you're a dictator on day one, to attain that goal, you would have to be a dictator on day two, on day three, and so on and so forth. I mean, I think to an extent even more concerning than those impossible goals that he's laid out are plans that his team behind the scenes has drawn up to override the traditional independence, this is in the post-Watergate era, of the Department of Justice. There is nothing in the Constitution that protects the Department of Justice's independence or impartiality. Donald Trump is going to strip it of that fig leaf. There is nothing that anyone can do to stop him from doing that. And he's going to use, I'm absolutely clear about this, he's going to use the Department of Justice to go after the Bidens, an organised crime family, he absurdly calls them, to go after people who have wronged him, traitors from within his inner circle last time round, people like former Attorney General William Barr, former White House Chief of Staff General John Kelly, the people who thought they could find accommodations with him in the first term and then, of course, discovered that they couldn't. And he's going to fire tens of thousands of civil servants and the not the political appointees, but, you know, the careerists that are always there, that serve administrations of both hues. And he's going to replace them only, he says, with dyed-in-the-wool supporters of his Make America Great Again cause. Those are the underpinnings of dictatorship. When you put people in the cabinet or on the National Security Council who only reflect your very narrow, myopic worldview, that's the beginning of the dictatorship that truly worries people here.
Well, I think it's quite kind to describe it in those words, but I appreciate your diplomacy. He also, I think, has announced an intention to release people jailed for joining in the insurrection on January the 6th that he also incited. This, of course, included people baying for the blood at his behest of his own Vice President, Mike Pence.
Well, talking about baying, I mean, we've got Congresswoman Elise Stefanik of New York openly auditioning now for the role of Donald Trump's vice president and describing those inmates jailed by judges having been convicted of deadly acts of violence and rampage on Capitol Hill on January the 6th, 2021, as January the 6th hostages. She said this in an interview on NBC a couple of weekends ago and wasn't challenged by the moderator of the program. I mean, that's how far the conversation has kind of shifted.
That's what I meant by the parameters and not knowing what to do. I've seen footage. I've seen footage of her hiding from the insurrectionists on January.
Yes, of course. But I mean, she then had a complete turnaround on the road to Damascus and became a vigorous supporter of Donald Trump, where previously she hadn't been. So she totally seized the opportunity to curry favour with him. And of course, you know, he has a tradition, James, of he smells weakness, and it is said that there is nothing he loves more than someone that has previously tried to sort of resist what he's trying to do, then eventually folding and caving in front of him. So I say she's openly auditioning for the role of vice president. He may go in a completely different direction, but he'll be deeply satisfied that she's now using language like absurd language, like January the 6th hostages, to describe these people who are serving, in many cases, lengthy jail sentences for acts of conspiracy against the United States.
And physical attacks upon the seat of American democracy. There's plenty to talk about, Simon, as the weeks pass. But final question: the prospect of it not being Trump-Biden or Biden versus Trump, it being some other battle, has now almost disappeared.
Yeah, yes, with the caveat that, as Harold Macmillan noted, events, dear boy, events can always change anything. I mean, yes, as far as Donald Trump is concerned. I mean, he's going to be the nominee. I think that, frankly, from tonight, assuming he wins the sort of huge victory that he looks like he's going to win in New Hampshire, it will be hard to avoid describing him as the presumed Republican nominee, although I think we have to wait for Haley to drop out of the race formally to do that. On the Democrat side, Biden is clearly not getting out anytime soon. Former New Hampshire Senator Judd Gregg, a Republican, was postulating over the weekend that what Biden might now do is win the Democratic Party's nomination, because there is a primary contest taking place on the Democrat side as well, win that nomination within the course of the next several weeks, by the time the daffodils come up. And at that point, announce he's stepping down and that he's going to tell his delegates at the convention to vote, instead of for him, for candidate Y. And he would pick his own successor. Now, could it happen? Yes. At the moment, he doesn't evince any sign of regretting his decision to be in this race. And that, of course, itself privately causes angst among millions of Democrats who would have much preferred that in the late summer or early autumn of last year he'd made a different decision.
And although there is only 4 years between the two of them, isn't there, between Biden and Trump? But your point stands. Simon Marks, always a pleasure. A genuinely pleasure to talk to you. Always learn more. Always know more at the end of a conversation with Simon Marks than you did at the beginning of it. But this is scary stuff. This is pretty grim stuff. And as I say, the media on both sides of the Atlantic. So Jacob Rees-Mogg and the other one, the really crazy, the one with Andrea Jenkins, both calling for Donald Trump to win an election after a court found that he was a rapist. I presume Jacob Rees-Mogg will bring that up in confession. It is 12:48 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. An awful lot of talk about this school where a pupil has taken the school to court over freedom to pray in break. But it's a prayer ritual. It's not, the kind of praying where you can't tell that it is going on. So the nearest Christian comparison I could make would be doing a rosary where you hold the beads in your hand and work your way through the decades. The decade, singular, forgive me. And the school wants to ban it. The school has banned it, which is why the case is in court. Presuming the court finds in favour of the school, which is far from certain, how do you impose that ban in 21st century Britain, 21st century London? How do you impose a ban on public praying in a school? 0345 6060 973. Shane's in Leeds. Shane, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. First of all, how I would ban it, I would exclude children who repeatedly flout the rules. That's what you would do with any other rule in the school, presumably. I don't know.
You've been expelled for praying.
No, temporarily exclude them at least.
But I'm not going to come back if I'm not allowed to pray. It's my freedom of religion.
In that case, then there's really no other choice for you. You want to attend this school.
Mind how you go. Good luck.
I'm afraid it's been a long time since I've been in the school system.
Sure. But it's like a retrospective introduction of that thing I talked about with Busher, where you say, no, this is a secular school. If you come here, you will not be able to pray. They've changed the rules in real time, but retrospectively, it means you're going to have to leave if you want to.
Essentially, but I don't know the geography of the area.
No.
But could they not, for example, partner with a local mosque to escort the children there at prayer time and then escort them back?
You've still got the problem of division and coercion. So the school's rationale for doing this is that it's becoming both divisive and coercive. Other pupils are pressuring other pupils to join in. That would arguably get worse if it involved an off-site trip every day. So it doesn't solve the problem that the school perceives.
Possibly, yes. On that point, I mean, I'd like to say I don't understand how this has become such a big issue in Britain. Now, I went to school in the Middle East. East.
Oh, yeah.
I grew up in the Middle East, and I went to school there. I went to an international school, a British school, and probably half the children were Muslim, and nobody ever took time out to pray.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we did not have prayer time.
I suppose that's personal, isn't it? There are some requirements in the calendar at certain times of year and certain times. The more observant Muslims believe that they are required to pray at certain times. But if you can,
we observed Ramadan, for example, so we understood that the Muslim children couldn't go swimming, for example, in case they swallowed some water. But I don't remember anybody actually praying. We didn't have a prayer room. We had Christian kids. We had Jewish kids in that school.
I think the only way you have that kind of multiplicity of faiths is by having no prayer rituals. But as you say, if you're going to make it a rule and it only applies to one set because no other set actually wants to engage in prayer rituals, then if you're serious about the rule, you end up with exclusions or expulsions. Thank you, Shane. A quick clip from the House of Commons where Rishi Sunak has doubled down on precisely the issue we were talking about in the second hour of the programme. I still find it gloriously unpersuasive, spectacularly unpersuasive, but I want you to hear it in his own words.
Mr. Speaker, I repeat that there is no link between our actions of self-defence in the Red Sea and the situation in Israel and Gaza. Those who make that link do the Houthis work for them. And I want to be clear that those here at home who glorify the Houthis' attacks are glorifying terrorism, plain and simple. They will be met with a zero-tolerance approach.
Why did you hit me? Well, I hit you because you hit me. Yeah, but I hit you because you stole my lunch. Yes, but me hitting you has absolutely nothing to do with your lunch being stolen. I don't see how the logical process works. I don't see how it unfolds. So I've done a thing because of a thing, and you've done a thing because of the thing that I did, but the thing that you did has absolutely nothing to do with the reason why I did the thing that I did. Do you see what I mean? I mean, again, I know this is a curse of mine, to think I must be missing something. A Conservative politician comes out with something that I think is utterly unsustainable, both philosophically and probably sort of semantically. And I think the problem must be me. I must be missing something. It's bizarre, isn't it? Anyway, how do you impose a rule like this? Mariam is in Manchester. Mariam, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Hi. I went to a primary school that was a Church of England school. This was like years back. So, and I wanted to pray, and the headmaster said, "No, you can't pray. This is a Church of England school." He specifically said that in front of my mum at a meeting when we were raising it.
Yeah.
So my class teacher, she said, "Ignore him. I'll give you the keys to my classroom. Every lunchtime, go in. Do you think?" It used to take literally 5 minutes. Pray, and then give me the keys back. So I used to go in, pray, lock up, and then knock on the staff room door and give her the keys back. And to this day, I will be forever grateful for that teacher. And it has, in a lot of ways, shaped, my beliefs and my values and everything. You've got to stand your right sometimes, and it didn't hurt anyone. It didn't cause division. It was a private thing, but then again, I did go to, I did engage in like choir, practice. I did engage in like hymns, so that didn't cause division in itself.
No, it's a great point, and again, the sense that the school could have done a hell of a lot more before this actually got to court is hard to resist. But of course, we don't know all the facts, and the more I think about it, and the more I hear tales like yours of intelligent compromise, the more I wonder whether the head teacher and the pupil are like a rock and a hard place. They're both sort of relishing what this does for their separate reputations. The head teacher revels in this nonsensical tabloid title of being the strictest head teacher in the country. Yeah. And the pupil becomes a sort of rebellious folk hero who refuses to back down because religion. Whereas, in fact, a teacher like yours, a sensible teacher like yours, would have found a way of accommodating your religious observance without really creating any controversy.
Yeah, and the pressure, like, you know, peer-on-peer pressure, I think that's down to, like, playground talk and things like that, which can be addressed with parents, for example. You know, you can review your behaviour management system. You can look at it in a different way, but I wouldn't put it down to the actual religion and the practicing. And bear in mind that with Islamic praying, it's a daily, there's prescribed timings of the day where it's obligatory to pray. It's not like a rosary bead. Yes, we have rosary beads as well in Islam.
Of course you do. I understand precisely the point that you make, but I do, and we probably would disagree on this. I would be comfortable with a school that didn't allow any... religious observance at all, but it would have to be something that you knew when you arrived at the school. I don't know how comfortable I am with it being introduced retrospectively. That said, Mariam, I'd rather that it was dealt with in this case in the way that your teacher dealt with than in the way that it has apparently been dealt with. I've got something important to tell you before we go, but I shall squeeze in Mark in Plymouth. You'll need to be quick, Mark. What would you like to say?
Hi, yeah, it's not very accommodating just saying that you can't pray, but I think the only way you would be able to achieve the goal if you're not a religious school is just to say that if you do pray in public, then we'd have to expel you. I can't see any other way around it.
No, I can't either. But what would happen, and let's think about the front page of the Daily Mail, if a child was expelled for saying the Our Father in the playground?
Well, the Daily Mail would typically they'd use they'd probably throw in woke somewhere, and then they'd say it's they'd say about
they'd
being
go
invaded.
Absolutely tonto, wouldn't they?
It'd be a totally different agenda.
I remember when the woman wore a rosary at the baggage handling at Heathrow, and it was like the Spanish Inquisition, but the other way round. Thank you, Mark. And last word goes to this texter. I did talk to you earlier about the idiocy of Daniel Hannan's Brexit predictions, even as the Daily Mail continues to pay him for his Brexit insights. And I told you that in Australian television, they laughed on the morning that the so-called trade deal with Australia was introduced, the trade deal that one of the key politicians who contributed to it, George Eustice, has subsequently described as rubbish, and that even Liz Truss was apparently furious with Boris Johnson for intervening, although she pretended it was a great idea at the time because it was all part of her leadership bid. And I told you that on Australian television, when they'd listed all the things that Australia got out of the deal, Australian farmers in particular, they said, and what did the Brits get? And one member of the studio team said, I don't know, Spice Girls say days? Well, someone's been in touch. As someone who used to work for the Virgin record label, please may I point out that the Spice Girls were signed to Virgin Australia. Virgin signed them globally. Virgin is now owned by Universal, but their CDs have always been manufactured locally in Australia for that market. So there are no imports necessary. To which the conclusion is clearly, not even Spice Girls say days. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on, it's like Russell Crowe's in there, I know he's from New Zealand, on Catch Up on Global Player, the official LBC app, where you can also pause and rewind live radio. Download now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Sawbridge, but now, bless you, it's time for Sheila Fogarty.
Yeah, I'm still sneezing. It was so nice the way you said the Our Father. It's such a Catholic way of saying the Lord's Prayer.
Was it? Thank you. Should have heard my Hail Mary.
I'll give you 3 Hail Marys and Our Father and a Glory be.
Lord,
if you leave me alone.
You've been naughty.
If you leave me alone. 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 Leave me alone.